This is part 2 of our research Q&A with Dr. Aaron Weinberg. And if you missed part 1, make sure to check it out on my channel. And here are the rest of the answers to the questions that you provided. So now that we've chatted about getting these individuals into a trial, they've taken the placebo or they've taken the active ingredient. What happens if somebody has a bad reaction? Are they removed from the trial, or do they continue? Do they get some support? What's been your experience?
While there is a lot of preliminary work that's done, benchtop, animal research, at initial phase where we look at safety in a healthy population, adverse events and reactions can occur. Not everyone's the same, not everyone's physiology is the same and how they react to a particular drug. So we always make sure that we have processes in place in case an adverse reaction does occur within a trial. First and foremost, really the patient well-being and safety is the highest priority. So the PI at a site will typically evaluate a patient if they have a reaction to see what their symptoms are, whether they need anything else to be done to treat that reaction, and whether they think it's related to the study drug or not. So adverse reactions need to be reported to the central study team, and there are really strict timelines around how and when to report it. For instance, serious adverse events need to be reported within 24 hours of them occurring. And the PI works with the sponsor, the IRB, the third-party advisory and safety boards to determine whether they think that was due to the drug, or some of these adverse events just happen in someone's course. Maybe it was a patient who ended up having a heart attack during a study, and it may not be related to the drug at all, but it was just going to happen anyways during their normal health course. So it's important for the PI as well as the study teams to determine whether they think it was related to the drug or just related to their general health course. If it's determined that it's related to the study drug, then there's a whole assessment that occurs. Sometimes trials are paused in order to really evaluate whether it's a serious concern going forward. And if it is, then, there have been clinical trials that have been completely put on the back burner and completely stopped because of adverse reactions. However, that's a very rare event. A lot of times it's determined that either it's not related or that it's not serious enough to stop the trial, or it's not predicted to happen in a large enough percentage of the population, and the trial can go on safely. I think all adverse events are ultimately reviewed by data safety boards, third-party advisory boards who have no financial incentive within a trial. So they review all that data. The FDA also reviews it before determining whether a drug should be approved or not. But I think something to keep in mind with your viewers is every medicine, unfortunately, has its side effects, because while a medication may improve an imbalance in the body that is caused by a certain disease state, it may at the same time shift another pathway in the body in a different direction, causing side effects. So the key is really to make sure that these aren't serious and that they happen infrequently within a population. Side effects will happen. We just don't want them to happen too often, and we don't want them to be too serious.
Right, ensuring that there is benefit of that drug for the condition of what you're trying to treat. And as the trials are progressing, is there anybody who is doing quality assurance on the data to make sure that it's accurate and to make sure that it's complete before it's kind of finally packaged and sent off?
Absolutely. There's a tremendous amount of oversight within a trial to make sure that the data is accurate, that there isn't any fraudulent practices going on, both at the site level as well as at the central level where they analyze all the data. There's many different groups that analyze data within a trial. The data is typically blinded to, again, reduce bias when it's being reviewed. Statisticians crunch the numbers and then analyze it. There are third-party independent advisory groups that review the data in terms of the efficacy and safety of a drug. There are contracted CROs, which are clinical research organizations, which monitor all the data collected and submitted within a trial. They scrutinize and query the data at each site and perform ongoing auditing and monitoring visits at each site. So they review throughout the trial to ensure that the quality and safety of each site is holding up. There's also the Institutional Review Board, or the IRB, which I mentioned previously, which reviews trial and monitors the safety and ongoings of the sites. And then the data is written up in publication, usually, eventually, in peer-reviewed journals. What this means is a manuscript is submitted to the journal. There's an independent body of reviewers who scrutinize the data, and they end up sending back many questions and points for clarification. And if they're satisfied with those responses, then they'll publish the manuscript. But if they aren't, they won't publish it. And these journals and these people involved are typically experts in the field, members of the medical community, and they really are gatekeepers to this research and what ends up ultimately being accepted and published. And they're extremely nitpicky, for good reason, on what ends up making it into the public. The data is also submitted to the CDC, to the FDA review boards. The FDA has the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, where a team of physicians, statisticians, maybe chemists, pharmacologists, other scientists, physicians, they really review the company's data that's submitted and the proposed labeling, how the company intends to market and label the drug. This is independent and unbiased review, and it establishes really that the drug's health benefits outweigh any risks from the drug. And that needs to go on before any drug is taken to market. So I think, to summarize, there are many checks and balances in the system, many hurdles to pass with these independent review boards in order to get a drug to market. And that should be really reassuring for the public. There's really great amount of effort to remove bias, to remove financial influence, to remove things that can skew one's view on a particular set of data or opinion, and to hopefully create an unbiased, objective assessment on whether a drug should go to market.
Absolutely. And now we've kind of been able to walk through thinking of the idea, getting the right individuals involved, having the funding available, moving through if there's any challenges. So if we come to the conclusion that a drug actually worked in this clinical trial at phase 3, what is a realistic timeline that you have experienced of something working in that phase 3 trial and then actually being available on the market for the benefit of the entire community?
Too long. I think it's estimated that a drug can take anywhere from 10, 15 years to get it to market, which in my opinion is way too long. I think we've seen during the pandemic that this timeline can be shortened and move much faster with a concerted and innovative approach, while not sacrificing safety or skipping any of the important phases within the process. We need to leverage these learnings and systems in the future that we learned from the pandemic in order to speed up these processes for other life-saving drugs that need to be made available faster. So I think if anything good came out of the pandemic, I think we can take away a lot of learnings in order to effectively speed up the process. So there's nothing to say that you need to wait 15 years in order for a drug to become safe and available. It's not like a fine red wine where it needs to get better with age. As long as the necessary trials are conducted, the necessary phases, the necessary populations are recruited in a timely manner, then I think trials can happen more rapidly. There's a lot of work right now on the industry side to figure out more innovative ways to speed up things to reach populations. So after a successful phase 3 trial, it can then take 6 to 10 months for the FDA to review the data and approve a drug. This, again, in my opinion, is too slow. I'd love to see the government speed things up in order to accomplish this review process. One misnomer, Dr. Swanda, I want to bring up during the pandemic was that because trials moved so quickly, that somehow they weren't safe. And this just wasn't true. The sentiment was propagated, I think, unfortunately, for political means and gains. But one advantage that we had was recruitment was easy during a pandemic because there was so much COVID in circulation, which meant that enough people would become affected to see the differences of a medication or a vaccine within a population compared to placebo. And also, there were heavily mobilized resources for the cause, which made it easier to speed up these phases of a trial. The same 3 phases of trials occurred and scrutiny was rendered. So I don't want people to always equate rapidity with something being unsafe. There's a famous basketball, I'm a big basketball fan. There's a famous basketball coach named John Wooden who coached at UCLA. and won the most NCAA championships in history. And he had the saying, be quick, but don't hurry. So we can do research quickly while not hurrying or being sloppy in order to ensure quality. And when people's lives are at stake, why would we settle for anything but efficiency and quality?
Absolutely. I'm really glad you brought those points up. And even just reiterating on the thing you talked about in our previous question was that during the pandemic and these vaccines being available in clinical trials, all that was being published in real time. So we were able to see these publications coming out for the vaccines on phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They were going into really in-depth analysis in some top journals where that they were being scrutinized heavily by physicians and researchers in the field. So it just further bolstered how rigorous the process was, even though they did need to be moving quickly without losing efficiency.
Absolutely. And we had so many patients, being enrolled in these trials, as well as then we had a lot of post-phase analysis and research that was done on millions of patients. I mean, it's rare for drugs, vaccines to have that many patients receive that particular intervention early on, and to have such high quality effectiveness data as well as safety data. It really was tremendous.
Definitely. And even during that, and you brought up a topic that some individuals had questions on related to what is the difference between when something is emergency use authorization approved versus just having typical drug approval. I think that this was a topic that was leveraged during the pandemic sometimes, and I would love to just hear a little bit of your insights on those two different terminologies.
Yeah, so you may have heard the term emergency use authorization, or EUA, and it's kind of a government tool in order to speed up that review process in terms of getting things in motion and getting it out to those to save lives. The origin of the EUA was a response to biological, radiological, or even nuclear threats, including infectious diseases. This was put in place after some events that occurred, 9/11, as well as, I don't know if you remember, the anthrax mailings. And Congress enacted what was called the BioShield Act of 2004, which gave the FDA the ability to authorize medical devices and drugs under an emergency to do things a little bit quicker than the normal timelines were. So EUAs are still an evidence-based process. They still require some proof of effectiveness. They require a risk-benefit analysis. And they also require that there's no alternatives on the market that have already been approved. So during the pandemic, a lot of these vaccines and drugs still went through the normal 3 phases of trial. They still were conducted, but under the EUA, the government was able to speed up the review process. And the FDA does extensive monitoring for safety and efficacy of those who were prescribed the therapy. So even though it's been approved under emergency use authorization, they still analyze that amongst larger populations in the real world to make sure that there aren't any new safety concerns that pop up and to make sure that the efficacy holds up. And because of that, there's just ongoing scrutiny and evaluation that occurs. And the government at any time and the FDA can retract that therapy if it proves that there are some safety concerns that occur or it isn't as effective as they had initially thought. That can be pulled quickly from the market under the EUA. Now, a full FDA requires some additional intensive quality and safety measurements. So again, the phases of trials are done, an in-depth review is conducted. However, there's additional reviews on the manufacturing data, on 6-month follow-up safety data, so longer-term follow-up data. So it's a little bit longer of a timeline, the full FDA approval. Now, drugs can move from EUA authorization to FDA approval once more data is evaluated and submitted to the FDA. So you're seeing a lot of our COVID vaccines and oral drugs now going through that full FDA approval process.
Yeah, I think that's great for the audience to know that it's not like once something hit at EUA, they weren't like, okay, done, it's over with. It still continues to be evaluated in order to get that full approval to make sure that there was no other safety concerns that popped up.
Yeah, and Dr. Swanda, the other thing that occurs under EUA is clinicians are obligated to report any safety events. So there's actually a form under the EUA authorization where if your patient had a certain adverse event or side effect, the clinician's actually responsible for then reporting it back to the authorities with a special form, and that's reviewed and that's taken into consideration on an ongoing basis, whether to keep a drug on market or not.
Okay, that's great. And if we hear about the timeline of a clinical trial, as we've mentioned, it can be long, but what are some of the issues that you've seen that can actually delay a trial from continuing to move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think some trials, there's really a struggle to find and recruit certain patient populations. So that can a lot of times cause delays. Maybe it's a seasonal requirement. So maybe you're doing a flu study, a new drug for the flu, and you need a certain amount of peak community infections in order to find enough infected patients to do that trial. So that may be, something that slows it down. Maybe it's a study that requires a harder to reach population, or maybe you don't have the diversity in enrollment that you're seeking. So all those things can slow down a trial. There's also interruptions that occasionally occur based on safety or efficacy concerns. So sometimes trials are paused if a serious safety concern arises until it can be further reviewed. There are also interim analysis periods where the data is reviewed and paused to make sure that everything continues to look safe and efficacious within a trial. So if they realize that midway in that midway analysis that things aren't efficacious, there's no difference between placebo as well as the drug, or there are safety concerns in those receiving the drug, they could stop the trial at that interim analysis point and not complete it, and then it'll never get to market.
And then if we tie back to the patients, how do we make sure that there is accessibility for certain patients? So if we think of individuals who maybe aren't close to a site, if they have to travel there, or we have patients who maybe have certain disabilities, how are all of those things played into the effective running of a clinical trial, and what's done in order to help them be part of the clinical trial?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's imperative that we make sure that all future diagnostics, devices, therapies work for all people. And even if a therapy isn't as effective in a certain subset of the population, it's crucial to know that information so we can find better alternatives for that subset. So that means that trials need to be diverse. They have to have diverse patient populations to determine this. And we must do everything we can to try to recruit diversity and not discriminate against any one group because of hardship or because of where they live. Research and the population's future health and well-being really depends on an all hands on deck sort of approach and effort, as well as participation of the various communities. So in order to accomplish that, we do provide funds, car services for travel. There's also time and effort compensation. So if a patient enrolls in a trial, we know it takes time and effort to participate and do those tasks. So they are compensated for that time. We try to schedule visits on weekends. So if people work during the week or they have certain childcare responsibilities, we try to take that into account. We also need to meet patients where they are by leveraging different models and resources. So there's this hybrid clinical trial operational model, which includes both your traditional brick and mortar clinics, but also incorporates home care, nurses going out to people's homes, virtual care providers to check in with the study patients, care navigators to make sure that patients do the tasks when they're supposed to. This is all very important in order to ensure that we meet patients where they are. We also need to educate populations on why it's important and a huge contribution to society to participate in research, how their contribution will help save the lives of friends, family members, and maybe even their own life one day. We need strategic and varied recruitment strategies to find these diverse patient populations in the communities that they live. We also need to involve more primary care providers in research, since there's already a built-in trust level between a patient and their primary care provider. And those clinicians end up managing these conditions and managing it very well on a daily basis. So ultimately, these clinicians will also be prescribing those future meds to their patients. So I think involving more primary care providers is super important in clinical research as investigators within a trial. I think typically research has been done in ivory towers with experts in a particular subspecialty, but I think involving more clinicians as well who really are engaged with their patients in the community is very important. And I think that's a big reason why Carbon Health is doing clinical research on a national scale, because we're able to leverage our national primary care and urgent care clinics and communities and really provide research as another care offering for them.
Yeah, I think that that's like a perfect way as we transition out of this Q&A to highlight why the work that's going on at Carbon Health is so important, and how individuals can feel comfortable with the person that they're talking with and have that confidence that their primary care provider thinks that they may be a good fit for this clinical trial, and really highlight the benefits or any of the potential risks that may be involved. It's that trust system, like you said, which can really be established when you are talking with a physician that you have a good relationship with. So with that, we've concluded all the questions that were submitted from the audience. I really appreciate the questions that came in to really try and delve into what goes on for these clinical trials. And I appreciate Dr. Weinberg so much for taking us through, walking us through all the way from how the ideas are thought up to how the patients are recruited, and then as we move into trials and what can happen if things are facing challenges or if they're progressing as planned. So if you want to learn more about some of the clinical trials that are ongoing at Carbon Health, you can email clinicalresearch@carbonhealth.com. And in the next bit of time, please keep your eye out for a landing page that will be occurring at Carbon Health, all about their different clinical trials that will be occurring. So as that landing page becomes available, I'll be sure to put the link in the description below so you can check it out. So with that, I want to thank Aaron yet again for coming on and sharing his time and his knowledge with us. And we look forward to chatting with everybody on another topic soon.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Swanda. And, I'd encourage everyone out there, there's a lot of misconceptions around the research world and a lot of bad information that's being propagated. So reach out to people involved. We're always happy to show you under the hood and really give you a clear view on what's going on. There shouldn't be any mysteries. You should know what's going on and why you should trust the system.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. So thank you again, everyone, and we will talk soon. See you. Bye.